The ballroom went silent. The millionaire smirked, thinking he'd humiliate her in front of everyone. "If you dance this waltz, you marry my son," he said, his voice dripping with arrogance. What he didn't know, that maid he mocked was about to burn his entire world down on the dance floor. If you've ever wanted to see pure karma served ice cold, hit that like button, subscribe, and stick around. Because this story, oh, it's going to leave you speechless. The Lancaster estate was a palace of excess, a sprawling mansion dressed in gold and secrets. Chandeliers sparkled like frozen rain above a sea of silk gowns and tailored suits. The air smelled of money, champagne, and something else, arrogance. Every year, the Winter Gala pulled the city's elite like moths to a diamond-encrusted flame. And tonight, it was no different. The ballroom pulsed with laughter, sharp and cruel, echoing off the marble walls like a soundtrack of superiority. Amara stood at the edge of it all, clutching a silver tray so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her uniform, neat, pressed, but plain, screamed her status louder than any introduction ever could. Just the help, a shadow among peacocks. She'd been here for 3 years, ghosting through these gilded halls, memorizing their secrets but never their respect. She moved silently between tables, placing glasses filled with wine worth more than her rent for 3 months. Her steps were measured, her posture perfect. Because in this world, mistakes weren't forgiven. They were weaponized. And Amara knew that better than anyone. But tonight felt different. The tension in the air wasn't just the electricity of wealth showing off. It was sharper, colder, and she felt it crawling up her spine. Every laugh sounded heavier. Every whisper seemed aimed at her. She kept her head down, but then his voice sliced through the noise. Charles Lancaster, the man who owned this house, this room, this moment. He was the type of man who didn't just hold power. He wore it, like the tailored suit hugging his frame. His silver hair gleamed under the lights. His smirk was cut from marble. He didn't need to command silence. It followed him naturally, like shadows follow the sun. And right now, his piercing eyes were locked on her. Amara felt her stomach twist, but she held his gaze for a second too long. That was her first mistake, because Charles Lancaster didn't look at people like her without reason. His voice rolled across the ballroom like thunder. "Amara!" he called, casual yet commanding as forks paused mid-air and conversations stuttered into silence. "Tell me something!" Her heart lurched. She hated when they did this, dragged her into their circus, turned her into the evening's entertainment. She swallowed hard, forcing composure into her voice. "Yes, sir." He leaned back, glass in hand, eyes glittering with cruel amusement. "Do you know what a waltz is?" The question floated like smoke, laced with mockery. The laughter came next, soft at first, then swelling like an ugly wave. Amara nodded slowly. "Yes, sir." His grin widened. "Good, because I have a little proposal." And in that instant, as the ballroom leaned in with bated breath, Amara knew. This wasn't a question. It was a trap. The laughter rippled through the room like poison, wrapping around Amara's ribs until she could hardly breathe. A proposal. From Charles Lancaster, that word wasn't romantic. It was lethal. She kept her grip tight on the tray, nails digging into the metal as though she could anchor herself against what was coming. Charles rose slowly, his chair scraping against the marble floor with a sound that felt like a blade being drawn. "This," he gestured broadly toward the crowd, "is the Winter Gala. Elegance, class, sophistication, the essence of our society." His tone dripped with pride, and the onlookers nodded like obedient shadows. Then his eyes speared her again. "And yet," he continued, "how can we truly celebrate refinement when some among us—" He let the words hang, savoring the suspense. Amara felt her stomach drop. She already knew. She always knew. Haven't the faintest idea how to carry themselves among the elite? The laughter turned sharp, slicing through her skin. A few guests covered their mouths in mock sympathy, but their eyes burned with delight. They weren't just watching, they were feeding on her humiliation. Charles set his glass down with deliberate grace, his smirk widening. "So, Amara," he purred, each syllable rolling like honey over broken glass. "How about you show us a little culture? A waltz, right here, right now." For a heartbeat, the entire room seemed to freeze. Then came the murmurs, the gasps, the cruel little chuckles. Amara's throat tightened, her pulse pounding like war drums. A waltz? In front of them? This wasn't an invitation. It was a public execution disguised as entertainment. I'm working, sir," she managed, her voice thin and trembling. Charles's grin sharpened, predatory. "And I'm giving you an opportunity." He stepped closer, his towering presence casting her in shadow. "Don't tell me a little dance is too much for you." Someone from the crowd chimed in, voice dripping with mockery. "Oh, let her try. It'll be adorable." More laughter followed, a chorus of malice echoing through the glittering hall. Amara's fingers curled into fists at her sides. Heat flared in her chest, not from shame, but from something hotter, sharper. Rage. They wanted her to break, to stumble, to fall, to remind everyone of her place at their feet. But what if she didn't? Her mind raced, a storm of panic and defiance colliding. If she refused, she'd be out of a job before the night ended. If she agreed, she risked becoming the evening's punchline for years to come. And then, like a whisper in the chaos, her mother's voice surfaced from memory. "Never let them see you small." Amara lifted her chin, just a fraction, but enough to silence the pounding in her ears. "All right," she said softly, each syllable like a loaded gun. "I'll dance." The crowd erupted, half cheering, half jeering, as Charles extended a mocking hand. She took it, her heart a blazing inferno of fury and resolve. If this was their game, she'd play it. But not by their rules. The orchestra hesitated for a moment, their polished instruments reflecting the glint of the chandeliers above. Even they seemed uncertain about this cruel little spectacle. But Charles, with his wolfish grin and commanding presence, gave them a nod. The first notes of the waltz floated through the air, deceptively sweet and elegant, a lullaby for the execution they expected to witness. Amara stood there, a lone figure framed by opulence, the polished marble floor stretching before her like a battlefield. The music's gentle sway was a mockery of the chaos roaring in her veins. Every gaze in the room clung to her like chains, heavy with expectation. They weren't here for beauty, they weren't here for grace, they were here for blood, hers. Charles extended his hand again, and this time it wasn't a gentleman's offer, it was a demand. "After you," he said smoothly, though his eyes glittered with triumph. He thought he had already won. Amara's hand slid into his, but it wasn't submission. It was strategy. Her grip was steady, her posture straight. And as they moved to the center of the floor, something shifted. The murmurs swelled like a storm, eager for the fall. Let them watch, she thought, a blade of defiance flashing in her mind. Let them choke on it. The first step came like muscle memory, then another, and another. Her body, once trembling with fear, began to move with a precision she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. The long-buried rhythm pulsed through her veins, awakening a part of her she thought she'd left behind. The champion. Gasps sliced through the crowd as Amara spun, not like a maid fumbling for balance, but like a goddess commanding the floor. Her movements were fluid, fierce, flawless. Every turn was a declaration, every glide a rebellion. Charles's smug grin faltered as he struggled to keep up, his polished shoes squeaking against the marble while hers whispered like silk. The whispers turned into stunned silence. Then awe. Then, envy. Amara didn't just dance. She owned the music, bending it to her will, rewriting the narrative they had crafted for her humiliation. And then, the moment that cracked the room in half, a perfect spin, her crimson skirts flaring like fire, her eyes locked on Charles with a smile that didn't just speak. It roared, "You underestimated me." The waltz ended with a sharp flourish, her arm extended, her head held high. The hall didn't erupt in applause. No, there was no time. They were too stunned, too gutted by what they had witnessed. Amara didn't just survive the humiliation, she turned it into a spectacle of her triumph. And in that silence, as Charles's jaw tightened and his pride crumbled, Amara knew this wasn't the end. This was the opening move. The hush that followed the dance was almost louder than the music had been. Amara could feel the weight of every stare, not heavy with mockery anymore, but with something sharper, curiosity and envy. That was the deadliest of all. Charles tried to recover, but the tremor in his forced chuckle betrayed him. "Well, well," he said, clapping slowly, the sound brittle as glass. "Didn't know the help came with such hidden talents." His words were smooth, but his eyes burned like acid. The crowd followed with polite applause, thin and obligatory, masking the wildfire of whispers already spreading like smoke through the room. Who is she? How does a maid move like that? Amara returned to her post with the tray, but every step was deliberate, every movement dripping with quiet defiance. The tray wasn't a burden anymore. It was a crown, and they knew it. But as the night bled on, the glances grew darker. Wives whispered behind jeweled fingers, their husbands' eyes lingering too long on the woman who had just shattered the hierarchy they clung to. Amara could feel the knives unsheathing in silence. It was later, when the gala waned and the stars burned high above the frost-kissed gardens, that the real blow landed. Charles approached her in the deserted hall, his smile tight as a noose. "You made quite the impression tonight," he said, voice low, each word like the click of a trigger. "Tell me, Amara, where did you learn to dance like that?" Her chin lifted. "Before this," she replied, calm as steel. His brow arched. "Before this life?" "Yes." For a flicker, something flashed in his eyes. Curiosity? No. Hunger. The kind that devours. "You intrigue me," he said finally, leaning in just enough for her pulse to spike. "So much so that I'm giving you an invitation. Tomorrow night, my private estate, a little celebration." His smirk was venomous. "Wear something that isn't an apron." And with that, he walked away, leaving Amara in a storm of dread and fury. She knew what this was. A trap wrapped in silk. A chance for him to reclaim his power, to remind her of her place. But Amara wasn't the same woman she had been hours ago. Tonight, she had tasted something dangerous, respect, and she wasn't about to let it slip away. No, if Charles wanted a private audience, he was about to get more than he bargained for. Amara spent the entire night replaying the encounter in her mind, every syllable of Charles's voice slithering through her thoughts like poison. His invitation wasn't kindness, it was a performance, a power play designed to humiliate her privately since the public attempt had failed. He wanted control back. He wanted to remind her that, no matter how gracefully she danced, she was still the help in his world. But Charles had miscalculated something vital. That night on the ballroom floor had awakened something inside Amara, something fierce, something unstoppable. The maid who scrubbed silverware and kept her head down had died under those chandeliers. In her place stood the champion, the warrior who had tasted glory before and would taste it again. So, as the moonlight spilled over her small room that night, Amara began to plan. Every step of the waltz she performed earlier had been flawless. But this This was going to be the greatest performance of her life. Not on a dance floor, but on a battlefield of wealth and ego. The next day, whispers clung to her like perfume. Guests who had seen the spectacle eyed her with something between admiration and hostility. Even the staff was buzzing, torn between pride and fear for her. But Amara said nothing. She moved through the estate with her usual quiet grace, every motion hiding the storm brewing beneath. She borrowed a dress, not a glamorous gown, but something elegant enough to send a message. I am not your servant tonight. I am your equal. Every detail mattered. The fit, the color, the subtle shine of the fabric. And then, her shoes. They weren't the scuffed pair she wore on shift. They were her old dance shoes, worn soft but still whispering secrets of her championship days. When the evening came, a sleek black car pulled up to the side entrance. The driver didn't even look at her as he opened the door, but Amara didn't care. She slid inside, heart pounding with a rhythm stronger than any orchestra. Charles's private estate was even more extravagant than the mansion, an empire built on greed and arrogance. As she stepped out under the starlit archway, she felt eyes on her, guards, staff, and then him. Charles stood at the top of the stairs, his smile cutting through the night like a blade. "You came," he said, voice dripping with satisfaction. "I said I would," Amara replied softly, her tone neither submissive nor defiant, but something in between, something that made him tilt his head in curiosity. And in that moment, as she climbed those stairs, Amara vowed, "Tonight, Charles will learn a lesson so brutal he'll never forget my name." The inside of the estate was a shrine to Charles's ego, walls draped in velvet, crystal decanters gleaming under golden light, and paintings of men who looked like him staring down in smug approval. Every inch screamed power, and yet all Amara saw was weakness, because men who cling this hard to control are the easiest to break. "Champagne?" he offered, handing her a glass as though they were equals. But the flicker in his eyes betrayed his intentions. This wasn't about hospitality. This was about dominance, cloaked in charm. Amara accepted the glass, her fingers brushing his deliberately. Let him think he's winning. Let him underestimate her again. He led her into a grand salon, where a single spotlight bathed the center of the polished wooden floor. And then, with a grin sharp enough to cut, he said, "Care to dance? One last time?" Amara's lips curved, but her heart drummed like thunder. One last time? Oh yes, Charles, but not the way you think. As the music began, soft, almost seductive, Charles stepped forward, confident, smug. He expected compliance. He expected awe. But the moment his hand touched hers, Amara's entire being shifted into combat mode. Every nerve, every muscle, every memory of her past victories roared to life. She didn't just dance, she conquered. Each movement was sharper, bolder than before. Her turns sliced the air, her dips defied gravity, and every flick of her wrist was a silent declaration. "You will never own me." And then, the moment came. As the music soared, Amara spun out of his grasp, just slightly, enough to make it look like a flourish. But when she stopped, all eyes, because yes, there were eyes, were on her. She had seen them earlier, peeking from the balconies, the shadows. His private party wasn't private at all. He had invited guests to witness her second humiliation, but instead of shame, they saw supremacy, and Amara made sure of it. She ended the dance with a breathtaking split, her head thrown back, her arms outstretched like a queen claiming her throne. The silence that followed was electric, heavy with disbelief. Then came the applause, not polite, not forced, but thunderous. For her, not for Charles, never for Charles. His face, a storm barely contained, rage, humiliation, disbelief boiling under the surface. Because in trying to destroy her, he had built her legend instead. And Amara wasn't done yet. The applause faded into whispers, whispers into murmurs of rebellion. Because that night, the hierarchy shifted, and Charles felt it slipping through his fingers like sand. He excused himself with a brittle smile, but Amara followed, into the corridor where the marble floor reflected the fury in his eyes. "What do you think you're doing?" he hissed, voice cracking under the weight of barely controlled rage. Amara stepped closer, her heels clicking like gunfire. "Dancing," she said, her tone sweet as venom. "You wanted a show. I gave you one." His jaw clenched. "You think this changes anything? You're still nothing." Amara's laugh was soft, deadly. "Nothing? Charles, your sponsors saw tonight. Your partners, the same ones who value grace, control, class. You know what they saw in you? Desperation. And in me, power." The color drained from his face, because she was right, and they both knew it. Tonight wasn't just a dance. It was a coup, and the ripples were already spreading. By the time the night ended, Charles wasn't the untouchable heir anymore. Deals were slipping, alliances breaking, his reputation unraveling thread by thread. And Amara? She walked out of that estate not as a maid, but as a queen reborn. Her name would echo in those gilded halls long after his faded. And as she disappeared into the velvet night, one thought burned brighter than the stars above. They wanted to break me. Instead, I became the story they'll never stop telling. That night, I realized something powerful. People who mock you, underestimate you, and try to control you. They only hold power if you let them. When you refuse to bow, when you rise and fight back with your truth, their world begins to crack. I wasn't just a maid anymore. I was a storm they never saw coming. If this story gave you chills, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs a reminder of their worth. Tell me in the comments, what's the most satisfying revenge you've ever witnessed? And don't forget to subscribe, because we have more stories of justice, power, and sweet, sweet payback coming your way. Until next time, stay strong, and never let anyone write your ending.